Now, before you move to Boston, I've got to warn you, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about what life here is really like, what living here is really like. And you may go online and hear people talking about how it's impossible to make friends in Boston, or that you're going to be miserable for half the year during those long Boston winters, or that you need to earn, I don't know, a six-figure salary just to afford a sandwich. And as someone who's helped many people relocate here from outside of Boston, from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Maine, Wisconsin, Kansas, California, even from overseas, I can tell you a lot of these misconceptions, a lot of these assumptions are either absolutely exaggerated or just flat out dead wrong. I've seen people thinking they're moving here and it was going to be a miserable, expensive experience or grind, and they've come to know and love the city, because there's a lot to love about Boston. So whether you're ready to start packing the boxes and sending out job applications, or maybe you're caught up in the negative hype that you've heard about Boston, stick with me, because in this video I'm going to hopefully bust 13 myths and misconceptions about Boston that will hopefully change how you view the city overall, and maybe forever. And trust me, some of these will definitely surprise you. But listen, if you're thinking about moving to Boston, just go ahead and hit subscribe right now, because every week I post videos that will hopefully help you move smarter, settle faster, and be able to enjoy this city to its fullest. So let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Mike O'Brien. I'm a realtor here in the greater Boston area. And on this channel, we talk about what it's like to live and perhaps more importantly, build a life here in Boston and the surrounding areas. Now, like most cities, Boston has a bit of a reputation, and it's like most reputations, it's a bit of truth, rumor, maybe a little bit of exaggeration. And when you think of Boston, maybe you think about a sports crazed city where everyone's really into their teams, be it the Sox, the Pats, or otherwise. Maybe you think about a lot of snow, potentially long Boston winters. Maybe you think about how everyone drops their R's here, you know, the phrase "pack the car," so on and so forth. Maybe you think about the housing market and $2 million condos and how everything seems to be really expensive here to buy a home or condo or otherwise. Maybe you're on the other side of things. Maybe you think of it as academic bubble with all these colleges and universities where people are just walking down the streets with, open books quoting, history or philosophers or what have you. The truth is, it's really none of those things. I mean, it is a sports crazed city, don't get me wrong, but Boston is one of the most layered and complex cities, I think, in the country, but you kind of only see it once you live here. So let's get into myths that maybe confuse people the most, or maybe the most common myths that can be debunked here. So let's start with one that I hear a lot from out-of-state clients. So the first myth is that Boston is just another big city. And even though Boston may look like a big city on a map, especially if you're looking at just a map of Massachusetts, Boston is a big city relative to the state overall. But even though it may look like a big city on a map, it feels small once you're there. And this is a city that you can walk across in less than a half hour. Of course, depending which direction you're going. But just this past weekend, I was meeting up with some friends down in Faneuil Hall, and we started just walking west, and we strolled through the Boston Common and through Back Bay and ended up down to kind of the Fenway, Kenmore section of Boston. And so what was a not too long, not too short leisurely stroll, and we'd already been through 4 neighborhoods and we're down on essentially the other side of the city. And it is also a city where once you find your area, your neighborhood, your place, it's a city where people will recognize you. They're going to recognize you probably at your local coffee shop. I know my dry cleaner knows me by name. Again, it's just that kind of place. And what makes Boston also unique is how neighborhood driven it is. Each neighborhood has its own little ecosystem, different rhythms, different personalities, different vibes. I mean, you think about Back Bay, which I just mentioned, which still very much see kind of the historic Victorian brownstones at times, but is also the higher end, retail space and restaurants. So you kind of have that history with the modern chic all blended together. You have Southie, which is basically a beach town that is set within the proper Boston city limits, or Boston proper city limits. So you can live in South Boston, Southie, and just be at the beach a couple minutes away. You also have Charlestown, which again has that historic feel. You're down near the Navy Yard. You have a ton of historic landmarks and milestones and that commemorate the different battles and again milestones and moments in Boston's history and the American Revolutionary War history as well. So again, each neighborhood has its own vibe. You can be in the North End, which is the Little Italy of Boston, and just a short walk away, you can be in the Seaport, which is very much the most modern neighborhood in Boston, very tech heavy, tall glass towers, and again, the newest neighborhood in Boston. It was parking lots not too long ago, 10, 20 years ago. So you can go from Little Italy to the most modern section of Boston in just a short time. So Boston is not just another big city. It is really a collection of small towns, small neighborhoods, just that happen to all share the same zip code. All right, this next one I just find to be untrue at the end of the day, and that's this myth or misconception that Boston is an unfriendly city and just Bostonians in general are unfriendly people. Now, in my almost 20 years total of living here, again, this has just not been my experience, so I just think this myth is patently false. Now, maybe Bostonians aren't going to fake smile their way through a conversation, but they're also the first to show up when you need help. That's just kind of the city it is. And I've seen my neighbors chip in to help dig a stranger out of the snow during a blizzard or heavy snowstorm. I've seen them hold the door and help people literally with their groceries to their car when maybe it's too heavy or too much to handle. And we talk about the city as one of the oldest cities in America, and in a way their approach is almost old-fashioned in that they look out for each other constantly. Now, I also hear Boston's not a town or a place where you're going to strike up a conversation while waiting in line in Dunkin'. I wholeheartedly disagree. I've been in line waiting for my Dunkin' plenty of times and had people strike up conversations with me. Or you're sitting at a bar and the game's on and you want to talk about the game, or again, just chat in general, which is great. So maybe there is a first layer to break through sometimes when it comes to Boston, but I think once you break through, that loyalty is very deep. And this is a city where people are very into their neighborhoods. They have that neighborhood pride. They have that Boston pride. And I do think it's a city where people do want to get to know their neighbors. So I understand why it can seem maybe cold at first, but I think once you, again, break through that first layer, you get to know your neighbors, you're going to have friends for life here in Boston. So yeah, that Boston is an unfriendly city, again, just in my experience, I think that is absolutely untrue. Now, kind of building off that last topic and that last misconception is now the myth that it's hard to fit in if you're not from here. Now, if you haven't guessed it yet or haven't realized, I'm not from here. I've lived here for quite a while, but I've moved away several times. I keep coming back, which is another story for another time. But again, almost 20 years here total. And I am not Boston born and raised. I am not Massachusetts born and raised, but I've been able to integrate into life here in Boston and fit in accordingly. So this misconception that it's hard to fit in here, if that's something that's preventing you from considering Boston or as a landing spot or preventing you from moving here, then just throw it out the window because it's just plain wrong. Yes, Boston has deep roots. Don't get me wrong there. You are going to meet families and people that have been here for generations, sometimes all living in the same house through all those generations. But there are constantly new people moving here. It is a hub for education, healthcare, biotech, artistry, and so you see students, professionals, medical workers, engineers, tech employees, creatives, artists and otherwise, moving here constantly. Over half the people I've worked with here in the Boston area, in Boston, are not from here originally, but it doesn't take very long. Usually I hear within months that how they love their neighborhood, they found their favorite restaurant, coffee shop, bar, grocery shop. They found where they're going to drop off their local dry cleaning locally. So they find their spots. But Boston definitely welcomes people who invest in it. And the way I got involved in Boston, or invested in Boston, and made my way into, I guess, quote unquote, fitting in was through volunteering. And I know that the other people, maybe they join one of the rec sports leagues here, or maybe they go to one of the great music venues, check out a show. You find your people, right? So whether it's through volunteering like I did, or you join Volo Sports and all the great sports teams and leagues and opportunities they have there, or maybe you're heading to Middle East or Roadrunner and catching a show and meeting someone who you love the same artists or love the same band. Again, you're going to find your people. And so what's amazing is it doesn't take long to integrate yourself into your neighborhood and to being in Boston, but once you do, you're going to feel like you've been here for years. All right, this next one is just a relocation killer. And that's because it makes a lot of assumptions about timing, logistics, the housing market here in Boston. And that's, you can figure out housing after you move. And listen, I get the logic, I get the thinking behind it. You think, I'll move here first, I'll rent short term, maybe for a year, I'll figure out where I want to live, I'll get to know the city, and I'll just buy, no problem, lickety split. But the Boston housing market does not necessarily work like that. A lot of housing markets don't work like that. Inventory moves fast here, like we've talked about. Leases turn over in specific months. Boston's very much tied into the academic calendar year, so often it's September for those rentals and those leases. And also, we talked about the neighborhoods having different vibes and different characteristics and atmospheres. You need to watch out for the wildly different price points when it comes to different neighborhoods. And I have clients I'm working with now, but they were relocating and they chose to go that rental route. And right now they're kind of stuck. They initially chose to rent in the North End because they thought they'd like that area. There was some availability at what seemingly a good price point. It was a good price point, but now they're looking to buy. Now the North End was not ultimately where they wanted to be. They figured out that they wanted to be in the South End in Dorchester, but now they're kind of stuck because they have that September lease. They don't want to break that lease too early for fear that they find a place, and now they're paying the rest of their monthly rent until maybe a new tenant comes in, if they're lucky, or the lease just expires. So now they're kind of limited to summer months for their search, when inventory is just typically lower compared to the spring or the fall. So again, they chose to rent first without really educating themselves on the neighborhoods and the market ahead of time. And now they're kind of limited on when and where they can search. And so that's why doing the research before you relocate is going to make such a difference. You need to talk with a local realtor, be it me or otherwise, who's going to educate you on the different neighborhoods and the neighborhoods within the neighborhood, the sections within the neighborhoods. Learn how the timing works, exploring the market a few months before you're ready to move, so you can make sure you know what the markets are doing, what the pricing looks like. All of that is just going to give you an edge, because once you're here, it's go time. And listings go on and off within days. But again, if you're doing your homework, if you're educating yourself, if you're working with a local realtor who's going to further educate you on the timing, the market, the pricing, then you can feel comfortable that having gotten to know the city, gotten to know the market, and you can choose and say, listen, I am confident that this is where I want to be, and we'll be able to have success in this particular market, finding a home, buying a home. Because once you get here, and if you're renting first, like we said, it's go time, and maybe you're not going to be able to find that spot as quickly as you would like, having chosen to rent first. But again, give yourself the edge, educate yourself, work with a local realtor, and you may not have to rent first to figure things out, because you will already know. All right, this is probably one of those half-true myths that no one needs a car in Boston, because we already talked about how Boston's super accessible, super transversal. You can get across the city in less than a half hour in your own 2 feet. And you have public transportation. The MBTA, the T, covers most of the city through its train, subway, and bus systems. But do you need a car? Do you need a car? That's going to depend on you and your lifestyle and what your daily or weekend routine is. Because if you work downtown, live downtown, don't leave downtown, then you are going to be just fine without a car. You don't need one. But if you, for example, like to get away on the weekend, do you like to go to the Cape, Berkshires, Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, then a car is definitely going to provide you with that flexibility and freedom to do so. The key is balance, because there's some neighborhoods where it's easier to have a car and park than others. East Boston, parts of Dorchester, you'll find street parking, though I'm sure some people in those neighborhoods will argue with me otherwise. But also, by the way, almost every section that's kind of difficult to find parking has resident parking available. So you have a sticker that says you're a resident of that neighborhood, and usually that resident parking is available all day or certain portions of the day. So I think of Back Bay, where it's very much kind of evening to early morning. And don't quote me on the exact hours, but let's say 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. the next morning. So is it easy to find street parking in neighborhoods like that, where maybe you're getting home late from work, 9 p.m., and kind of all those spots are already taken up? Yeah, you could be driving around and parking not very close to where you live, depending. So just be wary, or be aware of the different resident parking situations in these different neighborhoods. Now, some people try and hack the system a little bit, so they don't need their car very much during the weekdays, so they park in the suburbs and just use it to get away on the weekends. So no, you don't have to ditch your car, you just need to be strategic, but also be aware of parking can be an expensive proposition in this city. So if you're not finding street parking, if you're trying to get yourself kind of a permanent parking spot, be it on the street or in a garage where you don't have to worry about moving your car constantly for resident parking or street cleaning or anything like that, you can find those spots, but just know that that may cost you a pretty penny. There's already many stories about how expensive just leasing or renting a spot or purchasing a spot in the city can be. There's this story a couple years ago how one spot in the city went for $500,000. So just know logistically it can be difficult. Financially, if you're trying to find a permanent spot, it can be even more difficult. So again, just be aware, be flexible, and figure out whether a car is going to be an absolute necessity for your daily life in Boston. Now, Boston definitely has a reputation as a sports town, and that reputation and the fandom there within definitely increases and intensifies as the teams here are doing well. And so there's definitely a myth that if you don't like sports or sports bars, then you're just going to be bored here. And yes, Boston sports culture here is huge, and it's all part of the DNA as well, but it is just a small slice of the pie. There is so much more to do here in Boston than just sit at a sports bar and watch a game. You have amazing art, culture, and outdoor activity opportunities. You have the Museum of Fine Arts, one of the best museums in the world. You have the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum. You have the ICA, all great museums here in Boston. You have street festivals seemingly popping up every weekend, different neighborhoods. You have pop-up art markets. You have the Greenway that cuts by Charlestown and the Seaport and Faneuil Hall with pop-up markets, kiosks, artists, art installations along the way as well. You have a ton of amazing music venues. I mean, you could go down to Lansdowne Street near Fenway, go to House of Blues, go to MGM. You can make your way to Cambridge, to venues like the Middle East or Alston with Roadrunner. You go to South End and find live jazz in hidden bars. And so in the summer, you have people kayaking and sailing along the Charles River. They're going to do yoga and play sports on the Esplanade, or just hang out in all the rooftop bars in the city, or especially in the Seaport. So if you're someone that likes creativity, community, adventure, and maybe you're not into the sports or sports teams at all, that is okay. I'm a sports guy, and I maybe go to 1 or 2 games a year because there are just so many other things to do in Boston. I love taking advantage that all Boston has to offer. So you're going to find your version of Boston and kind of what wets your whistle when it comes to different activities. All right, as we get into the second half of this video, a quick aside to address maybe a little elephant in the room right now. I did not get to finish all the filming for this video before I had an appointment to get a haircut. So apologies for looking a little bit differently here in the second half than I did in the first half. But now on to our next myth, number 7, that Boston is just for college kids. It's a college town. And to an extent it is. Surely there are some of the best universities and colleges in the world here in Boston. Harvard, MIT, Boston University, Northeastern University. If you want to go outside the city limits, Boston College, Bentley University, just to name a few of the many schools for higher education that there are in and around the Boston area. Now, of course, when you're closer to these campuses, the concentration of students is going to be higher. You're more likely to see students on their way to class, commuting to class in the morning, or maybe coming back home after class at the end of the day. But there are plenty of areas in Boston throughout the cityscape where there are no colleges or universities, that you're not going to have that experience. So if you do want to kind of be in the college town portion of Boston and experience that kind of energy and that atmosphere, definitely areas and neighborhoods where you can have that, as certainly there are areas and neighborhoods where there aren't any colleges and universities and you're not going to have that experience. But I will say what the colleges do bring is a different kind of energy, events, lectures, cultural festivals, concerts, and so forth. So if you want to be a part of the college town portion of Boston, you certainly can. If you don't, you certainly can as well. I probably feel as strongly about this myth as I do any of the others on this list. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's overrated, or a myth, when people say that Boston's food scene is overrated. People outside of New England, or maybe who haven't just been to Boston yet, still think it's just about clam chowder and lobster rolls. And sure, those are classics. You can find them here as much as you can find barbecue in Texas or deep dish pizza in Chicago. But the food scene has really exploded over the last decade, I would say, or so. And you can find all different types of cuisine at many different levels of, or types of restaurant. And you can go to Little Italy. Oh, by the way, if you haven't seen any of the neighborhood walking tours or map tours I do, check them out, because you'll find a lot of what I talk about are different restaurants and great places to eat. So as I was saying, you can head down to the North End, which is Boston's Little Italy, and have great Italian food at Bricco or Quattro, or one of the dozens, I think maybe even hundreds of Italian restaurants that are in the North End. You can head down to Chinatown, have some authentic dim sum. You could head to Back Bay or Beacon Hill and have some elevated dining, fine dining. You can head down to the South End, have some great tapas, great wine bars down there as well. And this has become a city with James Beard award-winning chefs and restaurateurs, Michelin-rated restaurants, and I think the dining culture and the diversity and how much it's grown really reflects how global Boston's dining culture has become. And what's fun is bringing it back to the neighborhood conversation that we have had, is that each neighborhood has its own hidden gems or own kind of local feel when it comes to restaurants as well, and dining. And when you're a local in these neighborhoods, you can find these hidden gems. You can find those great restaurants, and they kind of become yours because they're part of your neighborhood. So Boston, I think, definitely a food town now, definitely a town for foodies. So if you move here, trust me, you're going to eat well. All right, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the weather, because yes, it gets cold here in Boston. Surprise, we're in the Northeast. Yes, it snows here. Again, surprise, we're in the Northeast. Is it absolutely unlivable? Absolutely not. So this myth that Boston winters are unbearable is exactly that, just a myth. I mean, Boston, like so many other cities and areas in the North and Northeast, are built for seasons. They're built for the winter. They've been dealing with winters for as long as Boston has been a city, and probably well before that as well. So in a way, people here have learned to embrace it. Right? So you have people down in the Boston Common skating around the Frog Pond. It turns into a skating rink during the winter. You have all the winter lights in the Common and going up and down Com Ave, absolutely stunning during the colder months. It really is a sight to see. You have restaurants kind of turning into little havens. So the outdoor dining that you see during the summer, they wrap those up or enclose those, get the heaters going. It can be really neat to be eating outdoors at a restaurant in Boston during the winter months and still be cozy and get to enjoy it. You have Seaport, which turns into Snowport, which, again, with the holiday lighting or the winter lighting and all sorts of great winter activities. The flip side of that is that the summers are gorgeous, and maybe that makes the winters all the more worthwhile for you. You'll appreciate them more. You appreciate the summers more because of the winter. So again, when you come to Boston, the winters are just a part of your annual life and your daily life. So you'll learn to layer up. You're going to learn to invest in a good winter coat and gloves and boots and whatever it is. And all of a sudden, again, it just becomes a part of your life here in Boston. Maybe it becomes part of the charm, because as lovely as summer, fall, spring are in Boston, winter can be just as lovely here as well. All right, I'm not sure if this is a myth that is oft repeated, but you're not going to get to know Boston in a short amount of time. It's going to take longer to, again, fully grasp all that Boston encompasses, and it's going to take more time to learn all the different areas and kind of nooks and crannies of the city. Now, Boston's layout confuses everyone at first. Even the locals can struggle with it still because it is in no way a grid system until you get out towards Back Bay and Comm Ave. But the streets curve downtown, they double back, and it sometimes seems like the urban planning was done by my 5-year-old nephew in crayon, perhaps. But this is because it was laid out and the city was basically built before cars existed. And so you kind of have that history in street form for all the positives and negatives of that. But what's cool is once you start to explore the city, once you start to walk in the city, you start connecting the dots, finding the shortcuts, the scenic routes, your favorite corners or your favorite spaces or nooks that maybe only you know about, you've discovered. And as a realtor, I get to be in and around and out and about in Boston a lot. I get to explore and walk around these different neighborhoods a lot. And I can tell you, after being here for almost 20 years, and again, being in all the different sections of Boston quite a few times, there are still areas and sections and things that I'm discovering for the first time, which is amazing. So yeah, you may not get to know this city as quickly as you'd like, but why would you want to? It's a little bit magical that you can still, here after all this time, maybe you've been here for a while, you can still head to some neighborhood you've maybe never been before, just a few times, and find something new and different and cool. And when that happens, you stop feeling like a visitor here, or maybe you just moved here, and you really start to feel like this is becoming your home or is your home. All right, we're getting towards the end of our list here. And so the next myth up is that everything that happens in Boston is happening downtown. And I would posit the question, where exactly is downtown in Boston? Because I think if you ask a couple different people, you're going to get a couple different answers. The easy answer is probably downtown crossing. It's in the name, downtown. But I think you could also make a case perhaps for Government Center with Faneuil Hall and City Hall, or maybe Beacon Hill with the old Victorian brownstones and kind of the most historical neighborhood of Boston, plus the Massachusetts State House is there. Are you working a little more towards the center of Boston with the Boston Common and Theater District, or towards Back Bay where Prudential Center is, and Back Bay just being a neighborhood that's a hub for so many things? Or is downtown or kind of the center of Boston where Fenway Park is? Again, a lot of different answers, but no matter where you are in Boston and what neighborhood, I think the point is that no neighborhood has the monopoly, or has the distinction to say that we are where everything is happening in Boston. Again, bringing it back to the neighborhood conversation, each neighborhood has its own distinct vibe, atmosphere, feel. They're going to have their own activities. You're going to have things you can do in South End that you're not going to be able to experience in Back Bay, or Beacon Hill versus North End. So again, not everything is happening in one certain section. I would say a lot of things are happening in all the different sections of Boston. All right, this next myth is similar to one earlier on our list, a little bit different. But in this case, the myth is you have to have it all figured out before you move to Boston, because that is just not the case. And Boston, we've talked about this a little bit already, it's definitely a city you will get to know once you start living there and going through your daily, weekly life as a resident of Boston. Now, that being said, again, going back to that earlier myth, you do want to do your research, gain knowledge, do your homework, work with a local realtor to learn all the different neighborhoods and markets in Boston so that you can move here and find that great home with confidence. But people think you have to have the perfect job lined up, the perfect home, and you have to have every street memorized before you can take that plunge. And I'm sure you do want to have a job lined up. You do want to have that home lined up. But again, nobody has it all figured out. Boston is a city where you learn by living. So again, the people that thrive here are the people who jump in, invest in that daily life and invest in learning about Boston. The people who explore on an open weekend, or maybe take an hour or two after work, they make mistakes, they get lost, and they figure out and build their life as they move along. If you wait until you feel you know everything about Boston and everything is perfect and ready to go, you're probably never going to get there, and you're going to miss the moment. So we're finally at the end of our list, and I appreciate you sticking around for all of them. This is lucky number 13, so let's get to it, because the final myth is that Boston will change you. And that's probably one of the half-true myths on our list as well, because it might not. Might a little, might a whole bunch. For example, I've been here for a while, like I've said a couple times, and I'm not suddenly a Boston sports fan. I'm still very much loyal to my Philadelphia sports teams, for better or for worse. But I will say that I've grown to appreciate the cultural opportunities that are available here. The museums, for example, so accessible. My wife and I are members of the Museum of Fine Arts and the ICA, two great museums, world class here in Boston. Again, so accessible. And so it's become a part of our annual, quarterly, monthly routine, we'll say. You're going to see the great exhibits coming in and out of those two spaces, or just having an open Sunday and going to visit the MFA or ICA because we can. And maybe in that way Boston has changed me, because I'm not sure if I would have taken advantage of some of these cultural opportunities or museums prior to moving to Boston in other places I've lived before this. So regardless of how much Boston changes you or doesn't, I think you will get to appreciate the history, the community, all that Boston has to offer. And once you've lived here for a while, Boston will become a part of who you are. Again, it's not just a place you live, but it becomes a part of your story here. So there you have it, 13 myths about relocating to Boston. If you're thinking about moving here, serious, curious, wherever you are on that spectrum, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can DM me on Instagram at Mike O'Brien Homes. You can email me directly at mikeobrienhomes@gmail.com. I help people do this every single week, and I love to help you make Boston feel like home and a place you love from day one. But don't go anywhere. Make sure you stick around for the next video here on our playlist, as we'll walk you through how to pick the perfect neighborhood in and around Boston that's going to fit you best. So appreciate you watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one.